This is Periel Delph coming at you live from the Hustle Squad New York with our distinguished and dedicated co-host, Jeanette Davis. Say hello.
Hello.
And our distinguished guest, Brashani Reese. Say hello, Brashani.
Hi, everyone.
And Brashani's going to share with us today her backstory, her upbringing, and her situation now, and what she's involved in, which involves prison reform. Am I correct?
Yes.
So, and she has quite the story to share with us. So, buckle your seatbelts. It's a very interesting and lovely story. Brashani, we're going to let you take it from here. You got the mic.
Thank you so much, Perry. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm humbled. I'm honored to be here with you all in the Hustler's Corner today. This is so exciting. So as you already said, my name is Brashani, and my family is originally from one of the most dangerous cities in the country, at least at the time that my family was living there, which is Lynn, Massachusetts. And so that's where my roots are. When we've spoken, I talked a lot about how my family being embedded in that community and growing up in that community, they came up against a lot of the struggles that people do in urban poverty, violence, domestic violence, addiction, basically just trying to figure out how to make ends meet while also being embedded in very chaotic and unstable communities, which are often the communities that are less resourced, less economically stable. We know a lot about what makes a community stable. So my parents grew up in Lynn, Massachusetts. Their parents had been there, et cetera. And my parents actually got married at the ages of 19 and 20. And when they had their first apartment together and they were off to their start of their life together, their apartment was actually firebombed overnight, which was something that happened in the 70s in Lynn. There were several incidents of apartment buildings experiencing arson and being burned to the ground by people in the community. So my parents, right from go, they had sort of put together their meager start to their life together and then lost it all, almost lost their lives. They barely made it out alive themselves. So when they tried to regroup and kind of come back together, and I often think about how, when you don't have a foundation to start on and you're trying to build a foundation, I think that that's what most Americans of privilege don't really have an understanding of, is that when you're born into a foundation already, you can build up from that foundation. You can create a house. But when you're actually building from the ground up and you haven't gotten that foundation yet, anything and everything that happens sets a person back. And so even though both of my parents, graduated high school, and my father actually went to Lynn Tech, which was a vocational high school at the time. I believe it still is. It's actually really in high demand now. But he became a carpenter and he actually had a really great job. But they were still embedded in this community where they were struggling. They were renting apartments. They wanted to start a family, all of that. So anyway, they had, fast forward, 3 or 4 years, they had my brother, who's 2 years older than me. And then I came along, and there's a picture that my father used to describe that was his inspiration for needing to leave Lynn, which it was me and my brother in this dirt pile out back of an apartment building, in the very, again, Lynn was a very dangerous place in general at that time. So we were in the projects, and I have my little hat on and I got a little shovel, and we're digging in this dirt pile and playing, in the mud essentially. And my father said that picture, which was a Polaroid at the time, really landed on him. And he thought, I don't want my children to be in this place. They had already experienced community violence. They had already experienced the struggle and the economic strife. So we ended up relocating when I was about 4 years old to rural Maine, which is where the roots of my father's ancestry actually is from. And so when we went up there, there was this kind of promise of, again, the American dream. So the houses were cheaper up there and it was the middle of nowhere. When I say rural Maine, I'm talking population 2,000 people. But what my dad didn't know at the time, when he was sort of, I think, lured up there, like many Americans are, to these beautiful middle of nowhere places where it's peaceful and it's quiet and it's safe and whatever. If there's no economic structure in place, then you're really just moving into another situation of poverty, but it's a different kind of poverty. So my father actually left his job at GE, which of course you could look back on now and be like, oh my God, he would have had a retirement fund, he would have had pension, you know, all of that stuff. General Electric is a huge company and he could have potentially had all those benefits. But my dad thought he was trading, you know, the city poverty. He thought for the American dream, owning a house, raising his kids in this beautiful wilderness. And that's just so appealing. There's so much like American lore around the frontier and like, you know, all of that. And now, of course, I can trace it all back to my ancestral roots, which I'm sure we're going to talk about too, you know, coming over from Western Europe to the colonies and whatever, which is my ancestry. So we went from urban poverty, which has its intensely sort of generic problems around like violence, that, you know, and instability in a very crowded place, which can feel very dangerous, to middle of nowhere rural poverty. So just a different type of poverty. And what that type of a poverty taught me is that when you don't have a lot of people, and most people who are there are living in poverty, then the resources to be generated by the town are like non-existent. You know, so my town was so small that we would go through these phases of not even being able to hire a police officer. You know, this idea of like, yeah, so we would have periods where I distinctly remember as a kid being like, oh yeah, the cop that we had last year, that's gone. And it'd be like one dude, you know, that they like hired, you know, to have they had a patrol car, and it was an old patrol car and all. I mean, this ridiculous sort of stuff. So it cracks me up when people are like, you know, scared of reallocating resources away from the police. Cause I'm like, I grew up my entire childhood without police. We didn't have them. Now, of course, it brought its own sort of issues. But again, I trace all of the issues back to poverty, which was that instead of community violence that kind of results from this instability and crowded people in really bad conditions, now you have poverty spread out, literally 2,000 people over 15 miles. So I had friends who didn't have running water. I had friends, you know, there were like trailers out in the woods, you know, that like people lived in. And it wasn't that they were scary people. It was that they just had no mobility, no transportation, you know, no jobs. They're just living off the land, whatever. And, you know, and my class, my school class, we were, you know, I started kindergarten with them. There were 27 of us. And it was like having 26 other brothers and sisters, because we started kindergarten and we all went like through, you know, high school, and not all of us made it, which is a part of poverty, right? And so what I saw around me was that the same thing that happened in the city is happening in the middle of nowhere. But now there's not really anybody to talk to except for those same systems that are in place that are oppressive and problematic. So, you know, if you want to get your neighbor's kids taken away from them, like you can call DCF and report, you know, which is our Massachusetts equivalent of like children and family services, you know. If you want to get somebody arrested for being an addict, you can call, you know, having a substance use problem, you can call the sheriff and say that they're selling pills or heroin or whatever, and they'll come and do their little investigation and whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like we had the same stuff with a serious lack of jobs and economic opportunity. And so my father just fell further and further. He was the only breadwinner in the household because my mom was taking care of me and my brother, which was, again, part of the American dream. My father insisted my mother not work, you know, it's the American dream that there's a breadwinner and somebody to raise the kids, you know? So that's kind of like, that's sort of the general background. I just think that as I was growing up, I became really, really, really aware of classism, racism, the economic structure that's set up to fail in our country, and have been able to really trace it back through my roots of, you know, my impoverished ancestors coming from Ireland, from England, and really this myth of the American dream. And so when I talk about prison when I talk about prison and ending prison and decarcerating and all of that, I really come from it from that place of like systems of oppression, systems that have really pinned the societal issues that we have on a group of people rather than addressing the issues themselves. I'll stop there.
No. We are absolutely loving this. It's just listening to it just makes me think of so many things that I myself have experienced. Jeanette, I imagine they might have brought some things to memory for you too. But
yes.
I have got to share this. I think I might have shared this before, Jeanette, but I have really got to say this. I'll never forget my brother. One of my brothers, he passed away last year. The Rona got him. But he had bought a string of properties up in Albany, New York. I'll never forget this. He bought like 3 or 4 houses up there. I think it was like 3 or 4 houses, or like one of them was like an apartment building. They're really cheap up there in Albany. So he wanted me and my other brother to go with him up to Albany and help renovate the place. So, from New York City to Albany, it's like a 3-hour drive. So we finally get up there. And just thinking about what you said made me immediately think of this. We stopped to show you how bad the poverty is. We stopped at a KFC, a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And we went up, we drove through and we said, hey, we ordered this, blah, 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 blah. We want to put this order together. And how much would that be? The guy in the drive-through said, okay, the price will be blah, 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 blah. We'll have it ready for you in a few minutes. I said, okay. So we pulled over and we drove up to head to the window, and we were waiting. We were waiting. And we were waiting, we were waiting, and it's like 5-10 minutes, going on 15 minutes. What's taking this guy so long? So we pulled over into the driveway to park our car, and I told my brother, I'm going to go in and see what's going on. So I went inside to, ask the guy, what's taking the order so long? There was like 2 or 3 other people there at the counter too. Guess what was taking the guy so long? The thing that was taking him so long was that the cooking of the chicken, the taking out the garbage, the cash register, the handling of the orders, everything was done by him, one guy, running the entire restaurant. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, dude, where's all the employees? He said, there is no, I'm the only guy.
Yeah.
That's what it's like up there in those rural areas. There is no economic base up there. The only economic base they have, because Albany is the capital of New York State. And the only income they have to depend on is the capital of New York State. That's it. There's no industries up there, no medical industry, no construction industries, there's basically no jobs. And the reason why the properties were so cheap was because there were basically, most of the people up there were living like bums. It was insane. You had homeless, bummy looking Black people and their next door neighbor right next to them in the very next house over or apartment over were bummy homeless looking white people.
Yeah.
It is like that, yeah.
I was like, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I was like, and I mean, they looked like they were down and out.
Mm-hmm.
And some parts up here in Pennsylvania is like that today now.
Yeah.
So here's what I say about the systemic racism in this country that is supposedly supposed to affect Black people. The spillover is that is affecting you too. It's having a tremendous impact on white rural America as well. Your story is like plenty of stories I've heard of so many people from white America that are in extreme poverty here in America. And I couldn't believe it.
Well, and that the trick the trick of that is that actually it has always been that way since the inception of the colonies. So we can trace it back to 400 years, which is prior to the United States actually forming. You know, it's very well documented. And I think this is what blows my mind about the white people, you know, from the situations in which I grew up in, who really cannot see like the larger picture. What blows my mind about it is that it's well documented that presidents, when they would run back in the early, you know, those first like few presidents or whatnot, they were very clear about their strategy, which was as long as they could convince a poor white person that they were better than a Black person, that person would vote for them. Even you could pick, and there's a quote, and I wish I had it handy, but there's a quote out of one of the books that I tell everyone to read about classism called White Trash, The History of Classism in America. There's a quote in there where one of the presidents even said, from the South, one of the candidates said, I can pick a poor white man's pocket. I can pick it dry, pick it clean, as long as I have reassured him that he is better than a slave.
This concludes this session of the Hustle's Corner in New York City. If you are a person that's incarcerated and you have books that you'd like to get out and you want to share your story, come share your story on the Hustle's Corner in New York City Tales from the Big Cities. If you are a person who has been wrongfully convicted of a crime that you did not commit and you want to share your story, come share your story on the Hustle's Corner in New York City Victims of the System series. If you are a person who has been self-reformed, active in the community, came out of a past nefarious life to a more positive one, and you want to share your story, come share your story on the Hustle's Corner in New York City Legends of the Hood series. If you are a Black business owner and you want to share your story of how you got your business off the ground and how you faced many challenges to succeed, come share your story on the Hustle's Corner New York City Black Business Movement series. If you are a musician or an artist or a vocalist or a rapper, hip hop artist, and you want to share your story about your career and how you have grown it into success, come share your story on the Hustle's Corner New York City On the Grind series. And if you are a woman who has been through traumatic times in her life only to overcome them, come share your story on the Hustle's Corner New York City Lipstick Stories series. And if you're enjoying this show, please help us grow. Show your love. Like, share, leave a comment, and most of all, subscribe. Thank you for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you again. This is Perry Odell from the Hustle's Corner New York City.